If you want to own real estate, you need to learn how to layer up and protect your assets, but this gets pretty complicated when you talk to a bunch of different lawyers and they all tell you something different, which definitely happens. But lucky for you, we've talked to a bunch of lawyers, found out who the good ones are, overpaid them, and formed a pretty comprehensive corporate structure and asset protection plan for our real estate businesses. And I'm going to share all that with you for free today in this session, but I'm also going to give you something else for free to start with. 25 copies of anything from the ACE Toolkit store. InvestwithACE.com/tools is where you want to go to redeem the coupon code I'm about to give you, or click this link floating over my head. And they do go fast. So you might want to pause the video and jump on over there real quick and then come back because 25 is not a whole lot considering the number of views this video is going to get in total. But here it is. The word is layers, all lowercase, one word. That's the coupon code. Jump on there, enter it at checkout. If not, you're gonna have to pay for it. It does not work for the Virtual Investors Guide, which is a comprehensive, franchisable version of our business model put into a consumer-friendly format that it's gonna give you everything you need A to Z to purchase property 100% remotely out of state, cash flowing property. It's what we do to buy multiple properties a week. We use it to train new acquisitions reps who find us several deals per week. So there's money built into it, right? And it's literally the cost of a home inspection. So if you're going to buy a property remotely, out of state, whatever it might be, it's kind of a no-brainer. Anyways, plugs aside, let's get right into it. I got to give you a quick disclaimer, and that is, I'm not your lawyer. I'm not anyone's lawyer. But I've talked to a lot of these lawyers, and I'm willing to bet a good amount of them still get dressed up by their mom for work and get a lunch packed for them as well. There's a bunch of goobers out there that are going to give you advice straight out of whatever their law school textbook was, whatever their bar exam question was, and haven't really applied this with experienced investors. I found the attorneys that have, and I'm getting this information that I'm about to give you from them, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't seek counsel before making any legally consequential decisions, because once again, I'm not your lawyer, I'm not anyone's lawyer. So let's jump into it. There's 3 columns to this asset protection plan that I'm about to give you. They are entities, right? Essentially LLCs in this case, insurance, and anonymity. And I'm going to give you multiple options for each and tell you recommendations for which options are for who, right? Your situation matters. Let's start with entities. So for most of you watching this video, one LLC is enough. You don't need a million different LLCs and a bunch of layers. If you're buying your first rental property, it's a pretty cheap property. You're buying a couple rental properties with it, maybe within the same LLC. They're all inexpensive. They're 200K houses. You're probably fine with one LLC. And I like to form this LLC in Wyoming. It's an anonymous state, which I'll go into later. There's a very easy filing process and flexible filing process, and it's business friendly as well. If you don't live in Wyoming, which I'm sure none of you do because no one lives in Wyoming, then you need something called a registered agent. When you form the LLC, it's someone just to receive a service of process if you get sued, if you get served, right? Someone in the state needs to act as a registered agent. If you don't live there, you can't be a registered agent. And if your Wyoming LLC is doing business anywhere but Wyoming, let's say you live in California and your rental properties are in Indiana, you are gonna have to register it as a foreign entity doing business in California and in Indiana at some point, maybe immediately after filing, maybe once you close on the rental property and you actually start doing business, that's probably the right time, right? And of course, you need a bank account for it. I'd recommend that. Now, we get into the question of what happens when you need more than one LLC. Well, I don't know any attorneys that I would give a lot of credit to for experience working with serious real estate investors that would tell you one cheap property needs its own LLC every single time you add another one to your portfolio. They all say a certain amount of equity, and then they give you other methods to protect your assets, which I will give you today as well. I like the $1 million of equity per LLC philosophy. That means not property value, equity. If you've got 10 single family homes, they're all worth 200K each, but you got a loan for half of the value, so you got 100K of equity in each one. That's probably the more or less the most I would put in a single LLC before I go out and form another one. Now, when you add another LLC to your family of companies, you don't want to have a million bank accounts. You don't want to file tax returns for multiple LLCs and register them all in a bunch of different states. So I'd recommend forming a holding company above them, an LLC that just owns all the LLCs that own rental properties and manages their finances, has a single bank account, files taxes for all of them. It just consolidates everything, right? So when you go to two LLCs, I like a holding company up above them so that you can kind of keep those ones just owning properties and deal with all the admin stuff at a single level. Now, if you're real serious about asset protection, or you have a lot of assets, so you're kind of big balling, you might want your holding company, which you own, right? Remember, you own the holding company owns all the little sub companies that own rentals, right? The holding company that you own, you don't want to own it. You want to have a trust that owns it, and you're the beneficiary of a trust. And if you're really particular or you're very wealthy, you might want this to be a self-settled spendthrift trust, which limits your connection and therefore credit liability to any claims made to the trust in it through a complex series of processes. And these types of trusts can only be formed in Nevada and South Dakota, to my knowledge, right? There's some international trusts you could pursue too. These are pretty legit and they should cover it. They're just expensive to form and expensive to maintain each year. So just think about it before you go that far. A self-settled spendthrift trust in South Dakota or Nevada. And that's about it as far as entities go. Now I gave you max layers, but remember, one LLC, probably enough for a lot of starter investors. Column 2, right? We talked about entities. Now we're going to talk about insurance. Insurance will cover a lot of your liability so that you don't have to worry about assets being perfectly separated, right? And every rental property should have insurance. You should be getting insurance on every property. You know, if your roof caves in, if you have a pipe burst, whatever it might be. But this insurance also has a liability component to it as well. $1 million per incident, $2 million aggregate is common for a very cheap liability policy attached to your homeowner's hazard insurance policy on any property you get. That covers a good amount, right? And what if you need more? What if you have a high net worth and you just don't want someone to come after you because you've got other assets and you need them covered outside of this rental property? Well, then you can get an umbrella liability policy. These are pretty inexpensive and they're based on the amount of coverage you want. I think the coverage you want should be based on the amount of assets that you own in total, the equity and your net worth, essentially, right? So if you're a higher net worth individual, you're talking 7 figures and above, then an umbrella liability policy is probably advisable at this point because you've got something to lose that's greater than the amount of the liability coverage you have on just that property. And then the next layer, if you're running a serious business, you've got some employees, an operation, day-to-day things happening. Maybe you don't just own rentals, but you flip a bunch of properties as well. We do several flips a week. And it sounds crazy, but they're small. We've got a variety of different businesses attached to real estate, and then we have a rental portfolio too. You might want E&O insurance and even D&O insurance. E&O is errors and omissions. An employee fucks up, it causes someone liquidated damages. You're responsible for it, right? This policy will cover the lawyer fees or maybe just pay out a claim, a settlement, something like that, right? And a D&O policy does something similar, but it covers the liability of the directors and officers, right? So if you're pursued as the owner of a business, this is going to pay for your expensive legal fees many a time, or just flat out pay the settlement because the settlement's probably going to be less than the expensive litigation fees. So an E&O and D&O policy, probably unnecessary for many. Liability is a no-brainer on your rentals. It's going to cover a lot, but it's not a lot more to get an umbrella liability policy. So I would recommend considering it if you've got some money, or stocks or other properties or equity or an inheritance or whatever it might be, right? And then column 3 is anonymity. Now I want to open anonymity with, is it really necessary? No, I mean, you've got other layers of protection. Some people never opt for it at all. The benefit of anonymity is if you have a variety of businesses that are all separated, it makes it harder for ambulance chasers to connect the dots between them, and they exist, right? So you definitely want to keep your businesses, confined to what they are, right? If you've got a flipping company and you've got 20 other companies that all own some rentals each, well, you don't need the people that are associated with your flipping company knowing about every rental property you own, and vice versa. So you might want to pursue these levels of anonymity. The first one is going to be forming your LLCs in anonymous states. These are all pretty easy to do, by the way. The anonymous states are, I believe the most watertight one is Wyoming. There's only 3 more. They are Nevada, which I've heard some changes to the disclosure of owners on public record in Nevada, so I'd be cautious of that one. New Mexico, which I don't think offers many other benefits besides the anonymity, might be business friendly because it's New Mexico. And then usually the states where there's not a whole lot, there's a lot of empty space, tend to have the best LLC laws. It's kind of funny, except for this last one, Delaware, which is the OG, but it's a little more expensive, right? I like Wyoming. It's cheap to form, cheap to maintain, lots of flexibility, and anonymous. And there's no state income tax, no corporate income tax if that ends up mattering to you. There's a lot of good things going on. It's kind of like the consumer gold standard lately. So those are the 4 anonymous states. And then there's 3 other things you could do to make your LLC more anonymous that at least come to mind for me, that are recommended to me, that I'd like to pass on to you. And they're pretty easy. One of them is forming your LLCs as manager managed and not member managed. This is literally a matter of checking a box and making sure when you write up an operating agreement, or your lawyer does, if you end up doing it, that they elect to describe it as manager managed. Why does this matter? Well, the manager is the person that signs their name on a bunch of stuff, right? The deed for a property, whatever it might be. The member can also, and the member is essentially the owner. Well, that's great. Everyone's going to know you're the owner if your LLC is member managed and you're signing for it, right? If you're the manager, they're just going to know you're the manager, even if you are the owner as well. And then you can appoint a nominee to form your LLC. In a lot of states, you are required to enter who is the person actually forming this LLC at the time of formation. If you appoint a nominee to do it, which you could do for like $150, you could pay the registered agent service to do it electronically for $150. One of my clients just showed me, it's pretty cool. They will form the LLC for you, and they will be the appointed nominee. So it's going to be their name as the former, right? The filer there instead of yours, which is kind of nice. And then the last thing you could do is just to limit the exposure of your address and make it so that your addresses aren't so easily connected between businesses, right? And you could do this with a virtual mailbox or a virtual office. Some states, the difference is a virtual office is actually a physical location address, and some states require your physical address and not just your mailing address to file in. I'm pretty sure Wyoming just requires your mailing address and not your physical address. You could just use a virtual mailbox. It's something like a PO box, except it is a real location. So I think there's some things that get flagged with PO boxes, right? So using the virtual mailbox for like 80 or 90 bucks a year, I think is what it costs, will prevent your actual address from being disclosed. And you can have different addresses for different families of businesses if you don't want them overlapping much. So that's really it, y'all. I don't think a lot of these levels of entities and formation, insurance and anonymity are necessary for the average rental property owner, but some people really like asset protection. And it's also good to know what your plan should be in the future as you do accumulate more real estate, more equity, and more wealth. So that's your trifecta. Do with it what you will. Take it to your attorney if you really want to just nitpick the hell out of it and just make sure you're doing the right thing. Remember, that's not me. Hope it was useful though. You guys have a great weekend.